Hello and good morning. It's Wednesday, March the 18th. Angela Rayner is upping the ante, and in her most pointed attack on the government to date, she warned that the very future of the Labour Party is at stake if Keir Starmer continues to make what she sees as mistakes. My name is Anne McElvoy from Politico.
And I'm Sam Coates of Sky News. It was direct, it was personal, and it was the sweaty basement yards from Downing Street. We're running out of time, she told the room. The change that people wanted so desperately needs to be seen, it needs to be felt, and we have to show that it is a Labour government that will deliver it. The clear implication is that the people across the street are not delivering it.
Anyone wondering how long Rayner was going to wait to set out an alternative stall had their answer in the basement of Walker's pub at the mainstream spring reception. It was a speech essentially saying Labour was on the wrong track in a number of ways and needed to be reminded that there was an alternative, aka Angela. She also set out her main target. She wants to water down the government's immigration reforms and rounded on the Home Secretary Shabana Mahmood and the plan to make it harder for legal migrants to gain permanent residency in the UK. She called it un-British and said it pulled the rug from underneath hardworking families. Any number of punchy words in there, Sam.
At the most basic level, we're 6 weeks out from elections, and this is just a gigantic split. It shows just the depth of some of the divisions in the Labour Party. Angela Rayner lobbing grenades in the very venue where 2 weeks ago, Morgan McSweeney, arguably the representative of the polar opposite wing of the Labour Party, was having his leaving do as well. The division is big, and I think the tension inside the Labour Party is rising as nobody quite knows what's going to happen over the next week, eight to 12 weeks, really. And that's dominating a lot of what's going on in Westminster at the moment.
And here was a former deputy prime minister effectively saying the party is running out of time, that it's seen as the establishment in some voters' eyes, and couching it, Sam, in very existential terms at a point when Keir Starmer is, of course, distracted by and focused on the Iran crisis. And some people were saying, oh, well, actually maybe the threat to Starmer has gone away and that the government can get on with its domestic duties a bit more quietly. Do you see any sort of strategy here, or do you just think this was, nobody puts baby in the corner kind of moment from Angela Rayner?
Yeah, it's a great question. Let's look at the sort of big picture of what she's up to first and come on to the immigration bit in a moment. What is the strategy here? Well, I was talking to a number of people yesterday. I think they slightly differ from the interpretation of this than you, Anne. Look at her words. She was saying Keir Starmer cannot go through the motions in the face of declining support. Now, that reads to me like she's saying, you need me. You can't survive without me. It wasn't a challenge against Keir Starmer. It was an invitation to Keir Starmer to do politics more like she would want to see. So I see this less as a direct leadership bid at this stage, and instead a pitch from somebody who, by all accounts, and I'm not just saying this on the basis of reading the words, still wants a government job after the May local elections, if there is a Starmer government in existence. She thinks that she can hop back into government and direct government rather than at this stage believing that she can supplant Keir Starmer, is my understanding of what's behind her calculations at the moment. I believe that they think, and I think this is pretty common view amongst Labour MPs, that no leadership team, hers included, is actually ready to go out the traps in 7 or 8 weeks' time if all hell breaks loose and Labour completely catastrophically lose the local elections and devolved elections. She's still got her tax bill problems. Andy Burnham's not in Parliament. Wed Streeting is still suffering the backlash from his antics of the last few weeks. So the play right now is actually to get back into government, because a cabinet job, Anne, I think, would actually help rehabilitate her reputation faster than just paying the tax bill on its own. And then after that, see where all of this takes her. So for all of the fanfare around last night, I think that's the idea, not least because it's not clear to me or a number of Labour figures that she has anything like the broadest base of support amongst Labour MPs that you would need to make a kind of actual challenge to the Prime Minister. Because for all that I'm hearing about a packed and sweaty room, how many actual MPs were in there, given that you need 81 to mount a stalking horse challenge and there are 404 Labour MPs in total? So how much I don't see what was on view last night as evidence that she has anything like enough. What are you hearing?
I'm just laughing because I'm sort of thinking Sam Coates or Lennon at the Finland station. Well, there weren't that many people there. I think this was intended as a vanguard moment. You're right. It's certainly nothing like a huge amount of MPs. So Dan Bloom was along for Politico, sent me some colour, and he was sort of pointing out, yes, it was very much that base and quite a small base of MPs from the left of the party. It's the mainstream reception. It rises precisely from that group of people who say explicitly they want to move policy in a different direction. But really, it was an Angela Rayner "This Is Me" event. Right? She was in a very upbeat mood. He was pointing out she spent nearly an hour mingling, doing what Angela Rayner does best, chatting to the activists, to the hacks in the room as well, about how she'd been trying to lay low. Well, if this was laying low, you can't imagine what happens when she really gets on the stage. She was introduced in a fangirl moment by the mainstream chair, lots of cheers for her employment rights, etc., and said she'd been waiting for this moment for a long time. And, I suppose the reason I'm not sure we see it differently, we maybe see the timeline a bit differently. This is not to say that there's an Angela Rayner challenge coming the morning after bad May elections if they turn out to be bad. But you said it yourself, Sam, if her pitch is, I'm looking forward to coming back so that things will move in the direction I want, and I want to be in cabinet, and I want a completely different drift of policy to where the party is at the moment. Well, I do see that as a challenge, to say nothing of the fact, and I think you wanted to turn to it, so really interested in your view on the line specifically on immigration and asylum, and Shabana Mahmood, in essence, you would be bringing someone back into cabinet who's just said that they're going to have a pop at the Home Secretary. I can't see how that isn't a challenge.
No, you're right, and all of that logic.
We'll just leave it there, I'm right.
Complete, no, complete, we're both right, sort of.
As always.
For all the schmoozing, by the way, I think she's got a bit of a repair job to do. We were talking yesterday about her intervention on a city analyst call in return for a 5-figure sum. I'm told that went down like the proverbial chilled vomit with colleagues. That's a quote from somebody in government. People are seeing her make money, and the Times, the State of It podcast, reports that she could be making kind of around a 6-figure sum in total from all of these speaking engagements, and that I don't think has necessarily endeared herself to some colleagues. Right, the immigration stuff is fascinating. What I think she's doing is building on what she will say is the lessons of Gorton and Denton. Right, in Gorton and Denton, one of the arguments that we heard from, and you remember this pretty much from the moment the polls closed, was that Shabana Mahmood's immigration reform plan cost them votes and really cost them that South Manchester by-election seat. And the argument has been that it goes too far, it is unfair, it retrospectively sort of changes the rules for people, and that is something that really undermined Labour substantially amongst many of the South Asian communities that live in that seat and a key part of the voter base. And that is what is motivating her on this. Now, what's interesting, Anne, is all of a sudden there's quite a lot of different retrospective takes on what happened in Gorton and Denton. Clearly, the New Statesman have been sent a sort of, as it were, exit poll by Survation there, which provides one line of argument. More in Common have another one. And what this shows is it's probably more a mixed picture than Angela is claiming. If you look at Luke Trill from More in Common, he identifies a group of Labour to Green switchers, more generally, not just in Gorton and Denton. And it's about the 12th most important issue, the immigration reforms, way, way, way below the fact that these switchers, like the Green Party, Labour haven't delivered what they promised, Labour's handling of the cost of living is disappointing, right? Amongst a wider selection, non-geographically specific to that seat, it doesn't seem to be the case that the immigration reforms are motivating voters to switch from Labour to Green. But that's the battle that's going on. That is the case that Angela Rayner will make, and why she thinks there needs to be change.
And effectively, she's saying that Shabana Mahmood is exercising bad judgment that will rebound on Labour. I think that's the killer point here, and doing it in the context that she did last night does underline that. And the question is it the right ground to fight on, specifically, as you say, because if you look at Gorton and Denton, one, can you extrapolate as much from that as people are doing? Because that can be pretty dangerous. It's a very specific seat. But also, will it put off other soft left MPs who want to grumble about a lot of Starmery kind of things and probably don't warm to Shabana Mahmood's very frontal style on immigration and asylum and the things that she's saying there about making it harder to gain permanent residency? Angela Rayner talking about moving the goalposts on that. But as someone sort of closer to the Mahmood position and trying to revitalize welfare reform, was telling me last night, it's not easy to move from where you are now to just saying, we'll throw in the towel and we'll just go and do lots of lefty stuff. And even people on the soft left, there's a number of people there we know, whether it's Andy Burnham, Lucy Powell, etc., Lou Haig, who are jockeying for position. Now, Angela has made pretty clear, it seems to me, the direction she's going for. She was explicitly eyeing your party members. She referred to them in a joke last night, but effectively said they were welcome to come and join our party, or rather her party. But is that a bit too much if you really pin it to immigration as strongly at this point as she's doing?
I think that is a contested question, and we don't know. But Angela Rayner, the one specific that I took from last night on all of this is that Angela Rayner has joined the revolt against the indefinite leave to remain proposals by Shabana Mahmood, right? I think we can read that. Now, sadly, this morning, the Home Office aren't playing tit for tat. And Shabana Mahmood was speaking last week. We've been sent old quotes from her. I think there's a sense that they don't want to be drawn into it. So there's no immediate volley of return fire. And let's see how Downing Street responds later today.
They do point out, though, don't they? Sorry, you're right. There's no immediate volley back. So just to chuck this in before we move on, maybe. But they do highlight, and I think Playbook and others got it this morning, that this is a progressive measure. So everything now that the government is doing that could be seen as moving rightwards is being described as progressive, whether it's that or the welfare reforms and the apprenticeships for young people kind of deal, bit the carrot and stick. So they are sensitive to this idea that they're not being progressive.
Oh yeah, and Shabana Mahmood, particularly when she went on with Trevor Phillips last week, was making the very strong argument that you save money by doing this. The public finances benefit from her immigration reforms. There is and that this is addresses one of the big public concerns. But here's the thing, Anne, that I think is really underappreciated by this 100-strong Tony Vaughan, Angela Rayner rebellion, right? There's no vote, right? There is no Commons moment. I was rooting around and discovered that indefinite leave to remain changes are just immigration rule changes. There's no bill. There isn't even a statutory instrument where you could construct a vote around, which is a sort of secondary legislation thing. So, because I was trying to find out when all of this might come to the head and when we might get our big moment of Commons drama. And the answer is there isn't any, because actually what the Home Office has done is construct a package without a big jumbo piece of legislation that will draw all the fire and become the source of discontent that can be killed. It's potentially quite clever. Of course, there are always ways of engineering Commons votes, debates, and rebellions, but it is so much harder because of the way that the Home Office have gone around the rule changes. And that, I think, as we write up about rebellions, I haven't seen that point anywhere, and I'm very, very struck by it.
It doesn't sound like there's any legislative ham in that sandwich at all. It's a really shrewd point, so that anyone who wants to move has to just create their own moment. One bit of legislation that didn't make it across the line is the assisted dying. Let's turn to that. Scottish Parliament voting it down in a sign that the political tide is moving against that controversial reform, and that there certainly seems to have been a big move against it from an initially positive disposition in Scotland. 12 MSPs who backed the bill at stage 1 then voted against it at stage 3. Where's this leaving things?
So with 57 MSPs in favour but 69 against and 1 abstention, this bill, the Scottish Parliament Assisted Dying Bill, is basically dead. Now, there's a lot of symbolism attached to this. It was actually introduced before the Westminster equivalent and initially went further. It seemed open to assisted dying being used by people as young as 16. And look, I think the agonies that we've seen in Westminster were repeated in the Holyrood Parliament. Some MSPs said that they only made up their mind with a minute or 2 to go until the deadline.
Most of the big names in Scotland came out against John Swinney, the SNP First Minister, Nicola Sturgeon, Anna Sawa, and his predecessor Richard Leonard, all voting against one of the most consequential votes, as Nicola Sturgeon put it, of her time in Parliament.
So let's see how this all impacts the vote down here, where rather than being defeated in a vote, the legislation is set, as we've been reporting, simply to time out in the House of Lords, who won't have enough time to discuss all the various amendments that have been put down. Yesterday, Downing Street sounded like it was unlikely to help revive the Kim Leadbeater bill after the local elections, simply saying it was a matter for Parliament.
And supporters of the bill in Westminster said the Scottish result shouldn't impact the debate in Westminster, and that at a third attempt in Holyrood, the bill had got further than ever before, and that showed a direction of travel. Kim Leadbeater telling us that MPs had backed the bill, and unlike in Scotland, it's unlikely they would change their minds now. But, I think you pointed out on this podcast, was it now, a couple of weeks ago, that it just feels as if that the time has run out, but that some of the air has gone out over this push to get assisted dying across the line. I'm guessing that's still your view, but you could tell us.
It is, and clearly it's the view of Kim Leadbeater and her team that this version of the bill, her bill, is going to die, because also in response to the Scottish Parliament result, she's saying what happens next. She thinks that after the King's speech, that actually the bill will return in a different form. When the Parliament Act would apply, that's the mechanism that you've got to push things through the House of Lords against their will. I have to say that's quite tough. If for some reason it doesn't come back as a future private member's bill in the Commons or the Lords, it could come as an amendment to a government bill. But I'm not hearing the government sounding like they're particularly keen on that at this stage. So a couple of routes there for reviving what's almost certain to be the premature death of her legislation. But all of these things sound very procedurally tricky to me.
Opponents of the bill, relieved by this course of events, Jess Sato, the Labour MP, saying the failure to get the bill through should act as a warning to its supporters not to force it and to try to force the matter in another way. And the focus should be on building the NHS and better palliative care. I mean, you have to say that does take us back to the square root of 1, doesn't it, really, on nowhere, really, in terms of this pretty deep argument in politics and in society as a whole.
Yeah, I think that's right. And it is raw, the argument. And I think this goes to the heart of why maybe Number 10 and the whips and all the rest of them don't really want to come back to this after the King's speech, when politics might be even more messy than it is at the moment. And that's because, right, we've had some quotes from Kim Leadbeater. We've had some quotes from Jess Sato, right? What does that signify? It's red on red, quite raw, quite personal, red on red, Labour on Labour. And you can feel the anger in those sets of quotes. And I think for that reason alone, like if you were sitting Number 10 going, do we reopen this Pandora's box the other side? You can see why not, of course. It depends whether 100 or plus Labour MPs extremely cross about a piece of legislation that they wanted to see on the statute books not happening is enough of a threat on the other side. I don't know, but do they really want to sort of ink in lots more fights? That's the question.
And also the fact that this was originally framed, I think, by a lot of supporters as a natural step for progressively minded people who believe in liberal self-determination in the end of life and how the end of life is going to be for people, particularly people with very sort of painful and difficult deaths approaching them. Only to find that a lot of people on their own side, as you point out, just take a very different view. So I think it has brought that into the open. I suppose to that extent, you can say it's been a clarifying exercise, but it leaves the actual course of assisted dying in this country like nowhere in particular in a long time, I would guess, before anyone wants to come back to it.
It's a fascinating issue. Let's see how it all plays out at Prime Minister's Questions today and over the next few hours, along with everything that we've been talking about to do with Angela Rayner. That's our 20 minutes up. We'll see you tomorrow.
Right, let's get the popcorn out. It's PMQ Day.